I'm working with Head Start there, and it's in Southern Illinois, and I still remember the kids. It's Rosie and Jessica. Jessica's in my arms, and Rosie's her cousin. And so I have fond memories going back almost 40 years, 39 years of working with Head Start and kids and things like that. So anyway, I kind of like to show the perspective of where I started and where I am now. So I'm the Early Care and Education Manager. I've been at ADHS for about 9.5 years. And while I work with licensing a lot, I work in the Bureau of Nutrition and Physical Activity. And in BNPA, as we call it, WIC is a huge program, and SNAP Ed is a huge program. And then there's my little sliver of Empower and ECE. So I'm like between these two massive programs, and I'm kind of a program of one. And I primarily support the Empower program and now Go NAPSACC in all of the states licensed and DES contracted childcare programs. So could be up to 3,000, but it's really not that many. And certainly I don't do one-on-one TA very often, although I do what's called for. But anyway, let's go to the next slide. So this is what I thought we would cover today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Empower history, Empower basics, and where we are now with Empower. Again, I know there's several of you who are new to your position, and while some of you may know this very well, others might not know it very well at all. So I thought I would take the time to just go through that. Also, I don't know if you'll send out the presentation or you'll have it filed or something, but the links should be live so that if somebody watches or just goes through the slides later, they should be able to click on some of these things and get a further information and document. After we talk about Empower, then I'll kind of go into Go NAPSACC a little bit, what it is, what's an overview, and then what we're doing with statewide implementation. And then just some general questions from you guys, and then get a little bit of feedback. Next. So Empower history. Back around 2008 and 9, we had a financial crisis like the rest of the country. Up until that point, the state legislature in Arizona funded all of, well, all, but a very small piece of childcare licensing. So for many, many years, childcare centers and ADHS licensed group homes, small group homes, paid $150 for every 3 years to get a license. And that went on and on and on and on. And all of a sudden, when we had this financial crisis, the legislature quickly said, in the next 90 days, we're not going to fund licensing anymore. It has to be self-sustaining. And that sent the field in an uproar because, as you can see on the second to last bullet, center fees were going to go from $150 to $7,800. This was a 90-day notice. Literally, we found out in about October that January 1, this was going to happen. And I mean, Head Start programs, everybody was in crisis mode at the time because no one could have foreseen this coming, and no one, even very well-resourced programs, could pull a rabbit out of a hat and come up with this kind of money. You know, Head Start being well-resourced, I mean, they have grant cycles and they plan, you know, several years ahead of time to apply for their funding. So this was a huge problem. And many people in the field thought, you know, this is really, it's kind of like the equivalent of today's crisis with other things going on. But at the time, we thought, you know, programs are going to close. Kids are going to go home by themselves. Kids are going to stay home by themselves. Parents are going to have to quit work. All the childcare is going to go underground and not be regulated. I mean, it was really, really a crisis. And so at the time, I was the Arizona Head Start Association director. And I remember going to some public comment meetings, and it was so full that you couldn't even get in the door. I mean, people really showed up. And we said, you know, what in the world are we going to do? We can't go from $150 to $7,800. And so they Will Humble, who was the ADHS director at the time, and some other very wise people put their heads together quickly and came up with a proposed solution. So next slide. They decided to leverage some funding. At the time, obesity and tobacco use were huge public health issues throughout the country and here throughout Arizona. And so these very smart people got together and said, you know, if we can find a way to leverage some tobacco tax money and some obesity prevention money to offset these licensing fees, you know, that could be a partial solution to free up some of that funding that they had always historically gotten from the legislature. So that's really what started Empower. Yes, we wanted to prevent, we wanted to promote good practices in childcare facilities and prevent obesity and prevent the use of tobacco and things like that. But it really started primarily because of this financial crisis. So the trade-off was, if they developed these 10 standards very quickly, like I said, 90 days this all happened. If you implement these 10 standards, childcare programs, and do it voluntarily, we will offset your fee by 50%. So $3,600 for a very large center instead of, I'm not doing the math right, $3,400 instead of $7,800. In any case, it was still a lot, but it was a whole lot better than, paying the full price. So we'll go to the next slide. So Empower was then born. And it kind of took the theme of this superhero thing and has always remained the same. So we've got images of lots of kids in superhero kinds of outfits and costumes, and it's remained very popular, and we've never really changed the look of it. It kind of has its own look with colors and images and branding and things like that. So next slide. So that's really how Empower was born. So that was 12 years ago, and it has remained a very popular program. It still has the 50% discount for the licensing fee. They've never changed, and it never went back to $150. The legislature has never come through and said, hey, we'll restore all that money, even though the economy is better. Currently, you may know that there's a kind of a 3-year period right now with some of the COVID rescue money, that Empower fee, or actually licensing fees, are $1 per year. That's retroactive 1 year. It's the current year and it's the following year. So right now it's $1 for a 1-year fee for a 1-year license. We anticipate in July of 24, I believe it is, that will go back to the normal fees. And then Empower, will once again provide that 50% discount. But anyway, so we're in just kind of a current weird time right now. But anyway, long story short, that's how Empower came to be. The standards that we came up with have been tweaked a little bit, but not a whole lot. And you'll find out later that we're going through a whole review process right now. But there are 10 standards. And you can see on the right-hand side, the standard 1 through 10, they focus on physical activity and nutrition, and then also some other general health kinds of things, the oral health, tobacco, and sun safety, and then professional development. So those are sort of like 3 main categories, if you will. And so in addition to the 10 standards, which have pretty much stayed the same, then we also have what are called components under each standard. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. But those are the 10 standards. And so when a program agrees to voluntarily implement Empower, they agree to implement the 10 standards and the components and have a written policy for each of the standards. So go ahead to the next slide. The program is voluntary for ADHS licensed programs. However, one of the great things that I think has happened since I've been on the clock here is that we have made some real systems improvements. And so for DES contracts, now Empower registration and enrollment is required for all DES contracts. we really started with family child care homes because you may know that there's kind of three categories of regulated. Well, there's more than that because there's military and tribal. But for the state oversight, we've got three categories of programs. So we have ADHS centers, ADHS small group homes, which are 5 to 10 kids, and we have DES family child care homes, which are 1 to 4 kids. So for the two DHS, it was always a voluntary program. For DHS, it was always voluntary. For DES, the first requirement was let's get the family child care homes in the fold, and then it rolled out to all DES contracted programs, and now Quality First also requires Empower enrollment. So ironically, that's a great systems win, because now during this time of a $1 license fee, we were a little worried that, gosh, people might sort of take a pause from implementing Empower for 3 years. They don't need the financial incentive right now. But fortunately for DES contracts and for Quality First, it's actually required. So there was a bright spot in the systems that we helped establish. Okay, so we already know the fees are reduced, and you already know that the programs have to agree to implement all the standards and components and have a written policy. So next slide. So the way that Empower works is that generally a facility will get licensed. So with their initial license, if they're a brand new program, the compliance officer, formerly known as child care surveyors, are usually the first ones to introduce the owner or the director or the corporation to Empower, because when they're doing their application and things, they tell them about Empower and the fee discount, etc. So they're usually the ones that encourage Empower registration, and there's just a click on our website, and the new program can enroll in Empower. Then once a year, the compliance officers go out and do their inspections for all the regulations and the rules, but at the same time, they do what is called the self-assessment checklist for Empower. So Empower has always been a sort of a soft technical assistance approach. A program is never going to get cited, they're not going to get written up, they're not going to get fined if they're not doing something that is an Empower standard or component, but they will be sort of counseled, I guess you would say, or provided technical assistance that, hey, how do you think you could maybe improve in that area? So it's more of it's not a high stakes implementation. It is a voluntary and softer approach. So every year when that self-assessment checklist is done by the director or whoever the visit is happening with, the compliance officer comes back and enters all that compliance data into a SurveyMonkey form. And that's how we know how we're doing throughout the state with Empower implementation. So again, there's no penalties or high stakes. It's really a continuous quality improvement type of approach. Next slide. So this is what the self-assessment checklist looks like. I realize you can't really read it, but you can see the big black bars kind of separate the sections of the standards, and there can be, from 1 to maybe 7 or 8 different components under each standard. So for family style meal service, for example, the standard says implement family style meal service, but the components might say adults sit with the children during meals. The television and media is not on during mealtime. The children use child-sized utensils, things like that are components of successfully implementing family-style meals. And then the columns will ask the person, the director or owner, do you fully implement this? Do you partially implement it? Do you don't implement it at all, or you don't know? And then those are the results that are put into the SurveyMonkey by the licensing staff. And then we have a huge aggregate report on how we are doing with Empower implementation throughout the entire state. And then the very last section is, do you have a written policy for the following standards, yes or no, or I don't know. Next slide. So Empower has had some evolution over the years. At first, like I said, this all happened within 90 days. It was a set of standards, and then quickly there were resources that followed up with that. There was some branding. When a new program got licensed, and in the very beginning, a packet of information, hard copy, was sent out to every enrolled program. And that lasted for many years. And it became too expensive and too cumbersome to continue doing that. So now it's all digital and electronic. But they didn't have a person like me. They didn't have a dedicated, Empower support staff person. And I still actually don't have really solid funding, believe it or not, after all this time. My position has been funded by CDC, by the Nemours grant, by WIC lottery. I don't really have a line item that says Empower staff, but it's an important endeavor to the health department, and they always find ways to, to fund the position. And we still leverage money from Women and Children's Health, from other kinds of grant funding that we have. For years, we had a training conference, not for many years, maybe 3 or 4 years, we had a training conference for Empower. We have 10 online courses, 5 of them in Spanish. We've updated the standards and components a little bit. I had initiated a monthly newsletter and did that for years. We have a lot of information on the website. So things have evolved. We also have an Empower Advisory Committee. We didn't have that in the very beginning. Like I said, we DES contracts and family child care homes now participate, as do Quality First programs. And probably our biggest things in the last couple of years is we don't have a standard on inclusion, but our philosophy is that we want to promote inclusion as much as possible of having kids with disabilities or special health care needs in child care programs. And so we have a section on our website of children with different abilities and resources of how to do that. And then very recently, within the last year, we issued an out-of-school time Empower guidebook, and the self-assessment checklist is slightly different. The standards are all the same. The examples are a little bit more age appropriate to school age programs that serve 5 to 12-year-olds only. So it doesn't say things like, don't walk around with a sippy cup if you're in a toddler room and things like that. And then we're right now going through a major update, I would say, and that's fine. No, you can change the slide. And what we're doing now, and some of you have been involved in that, is that we are looking at all of our standards and components. So for probably close to the last 3 years, our Empower Advisory Committee has been charged with looking at all 10 standards and the components. We have separate work groups for each topic or subject area. They're looking at each individual component and standard, and they are comparing it to what is currently in licensing regulation or rule, because over the years some things have changed. For example, our state has a smoke-free law now, and that is one of the Empower standards. So for example, we may not need that anymore if it's a state law and it's going to happen anyway. So as things change, we want to make sure that Empower is always above and beyond what's required for licensing, but also within reach so that it is achievable and reasonable. So we're looking at all those things. We're looking at what's already in rule or regulation. We're looking at what best practice is. And when we say that, we're looking at Caring for Our Children, Academy of Pediatrics, CLAS and ECHRS, if applicable, or other rating scales, different accreditation systems, some of the ADE materials with program guidelines. I mean, we just kind of look at all sources that we think are best practice, and now including Go NAPSACC. So the work groups made recommendations, and we had some webinars to get some feedback and comment. And then we put out a survey to the field as much as we could, probably over 10,000 people this survey went to. And we had a pretty good results. We got over 750 people or respondents providing input and comments. And so now we've categorized the survey results, the comments, we've grouped them, and tomorrow at our advisory committee meeting, we will be hearing an update. So that is rolling along, and fingers crossed, those changes would be in place as of July 1 of 2023. The Empower assessment cycle and licensing cycle always goes from July 1 through June 30. So we're hoping that, that these may go into effect July 1 of 2023. So I think that's it, but let's go to the next slide. So let me pause there for just a minute. I'll get something to drink, and you guys can collect your thoughts or ask maybe some brief questions. I think I'm okay on time. Anything coming up right now? I'll take the silence as a no, and we'll start rolling along with Go NAPSACC.
Susie, do you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I wasn't seeing anything.
Susie was waving, but I didn't know if you had a question, Susie.
I was just saying the history is so great to hear, because I didn't know some of the ancient history. So thank you.
Well, good. I'm glad. I find this stuff fascinating. That tells a lot about me, right? But it is interesting to hear the context, because, you hear about a program and you really have no idea why or when, or, the evolution. So thank you, Susie. I appreciate it. And welcome. I didn't see you on there. So anyway, so for the last 3 years, I have just finished implementing a grant that we got from Nemours, and it was jointly administered by Nemours and University of North Carolina, UNC. And part of that grant was doing learning collaboratives and some state systems work, and the implementation of a newer program called Go NAPSACC. So Go NAPSACC stands for Nutrition and Physical Activity Self-Assessment for Childcare. So as part of that grant, actually, when I was hired 9.5 years ago, back in 2013, ironically enough, I was hired to run the Nemours grant, the first iteration that we had, and we used NAPSACC then. It was a paper and pencil version. And our learning collaboratives, we had about 150 centers throughout the state, and we gathered in groups of 24 centers in person. And we did that for a couple of years, and that was my first introduction to NAPSACC and Nemours and many other things. So fast forward 3 years ago, we got our next Nemours grant. We worked with UNC, and now, lo and behold, NAPSACC is Go NAPSACC, and it's an online web-based platform. And it's much more than just the paper and pencil version. It's always stood for Nutrition and Physical Activity Self-Assessment for Childcare. There's actually a center-based and a home-based version of the assessment tools. But it's much more than just the assessment. So it is for birth to 5 age programs only. And the way that it works is, like I said, we've used it for the last 3 years with the Learning Collaborative programs, but now it is open statewide, free to all childcare providers, but it needs to be a program that creates the account. So it's either a center or it's a family childcare home setting that creates the account. An individual teacher does not create an account. So it's the program that creates it. In addition to the assessment tools, it's really tied to an improvement cycle. So I'll go through that cycle I think on the next slide. But anyway, that's a major part of what Go NAPSACC is all about, is a self-improvement process. It also has a lot of really helpful tips and materials. There are handouts, parent letters, activity ideas, video vignettes, and some are in English and Spanish. So there's a real variety of very helpful training materials, but they're all tied to the 7 topics, which I'll talk about in a minute also. And lastly, there are 35 courses that are online through the Go NAPSACC account, and those will all include registry credit if the participant who takes the course writes down their registry ID number. So that's all being worked out right now. In fact, we're almost ready to turn the switch for the registry credit. The way it's a little bit different though. It's not like a big mystery, but the way that a program gets a free account is they need a code, and they need that from somebody who has the code, like me, or a TA consultant who's already been trained on Go NAPSACC, or a statewide admin team member, like I think Brooke had made an account, and I think Wendy is making an account or has one. But anyway, we have a statewide administrative team that helps plan this implementation throughout the state. And we have great support with all of the usual suspect state agencies. It's actually jointly funded between ADHS, First Things First, and DES. And ADE is promoting opportunities like this today and is clearly a fourth and important partner in the implementation. And we'll go to the next slide. So I think one of the biggest values of participating in the Go NAPSACC process is the ability to go through the self-improvement cycle. So it's a 5-step process, and this is really self-directed by the program staff. No one in particular makes them do this. It could be maybe a goal of a center director or a corporation, or when we had our learning collaboratives, there was a very aggressive schedule of doing the self-assessment, self-improvement cycle. But in general, the program would do a self-assessment in, let's say child nutrition. They wanted to see how their practices rank against best practices in child nutrition, kind of across the country with all, nutrition best practice sources. So they'll take a self-assessment. And by the way, let me back up. When they create their account to begin with, they sort of describe their profile. And so, for example, if they don't take infants and don't serve infants, and indicate that, then they won't have infant questions on their self-assessment. So that first step of creating the account and profile is an important one, so that the questions they get are always, accurate and relevant. So it's kind of a logic setup. So anyway, they'll do a self-assessment in infant nutrition. There's a lot of different ways and a lot of things I could say about the self-assessment, but I'll leave it at that. Then they get a kind of a score, a little report card, if you will, and that it'll go through different sections of the assessment tool. And then the program will decide, I'd like to work on, this goal or that goal, maybe 2 or 3 things at the most. We want it manageable, achievable, especially when they're just starting out. So they kind of make a plan. We want to maybe cut down on foods with a lot of sodium or pre-fried foods or something like that. Then they're going to take action. They're going to figure out, well, what do I need in order to cut down on foods with high sodium or pre-fried foods? Well, I might need some new menu ideas. I might need to, have the cook maybe take a couple of courses, online courses that are free through Go NAPSACC, in maybe food preparation. Or maybe we have to let parents know that, we're taking some of these steps. The learn more would be using those tips and materials and some of those online courses, and then the keep it up. So they want to reassess now that they've made some of these changes, see where they are, and now do they want to select maybe a couple of different goals and move forward, or do they want to maybe move to a different module? So that really is the I'm going to say the most important piece of the Go NAPSACC platform is that the center or program can move ahead at their own interest, their own speed, their own style in order to make improvements. And if they have a TA consultant, we'll talk about that in a minute, then the TA consultant can kind of help guide them through this as well. So next slide. So there's currently 7 modules in the Go NAPSACC platform, and you can see those listed. Again, they're mostly nutrition and physical activity. There is a farm to ECE, and they're going to be adding a social emotional module. So you can see if some of you had questions about how do Empower and Go NAPSACC relate, you'll almost see identical topics. There's not tobacco, there's not sun safety, or professional development per se, but pretty much every other topic is covered on here. Breastfeeding is in here. Actually, family style meals is in, I believe, the child nutrition module. Screen time is in our Empower physical activity standard. So there's a lot of similarities. So next slide. So the way that we're implementing this statewide is it's been a little bit of a slow go, but we've only been formally at it since July 1. We have a state administrative team, and that is we have state reps from the 4 different agencies, the child serving agencies, and we meet monthly with our implementation advisor. Her name is Aviva, and she is in Raleigh, North Carolina. And she has Arizona as her, as in addition to many other states. And she's kind of my go-to person. I'm considered the lead for the statewide Go NAPSACC. So if you go to like the national Go NAPSACC website and you hover over Arizona, you'll see my contact info if people have questions about it. And then I try to, maybe filter them out. But largely it's been me until now. But now I have a state admin team, and some of you are on that, and I'm very thankful. So what we're trying to do is kind of roll out an implementation system. We have a commitment from the 3 funding agencies here in Arizona for funding this for 3 years. So we're just starting year 1, and we wanted to give it a few years to see, will this catch on? Are programs going to use it? Will they find it valuable? Can we recruit some TA consultants to promote this? Does it support Empower and other kinds of things? And, is this something we want to use our resources for? And it's not very expensive in the grand scheme of things. The annual subscription is $30,000 for the year. And that allows any program in Arizona to create a free account and utilize the training and things. So part of our goal is we really need to recruit ECE programs right now to actually just create an account. We'd love them to complete an improvement cycle that I had described. And right now I have some incentives for programs that do that. We'd like for them to take some of the training through that program account. And like I said, we're pairing that right now with registry credit. We're also recruiting TA consultants who basically, this isn't a paid position. There's no money attached to this. This is really just the use of the platform and the resources. So when I say recruiting TA consultants, we have childcare health consultants that are already out in programs who have gone through TA consultant training. They are training on Empower and health and nutrition anyway. And so many of them are also promoting and supporting Go NAPSACC and kind of problem solving. They actually can list and log all of their TA in the program's account. They can link with them I don't do social media, but like on Facebook, you can invite a friend. They can link the TA consultant to the ECE program's account. The TA consultant can look at the account, see what the program has done, make their TA more effective when they call or go out on site in order to support them. We're also looking to pair TA consultants with ECE programs. So we've had a lot of people go through the TA consultant training. We don't have a lot of active TAs, and that's one thing that we want to work on. Primarily right now, we have about 300 programs, ECE programs, that have a Go NAPSACC account throughout the state. And we have about 50-ish TA consultants that have been trained. The training is offered monthly and it's free through Go NAPSACC. And most of those are either child care health consultants or SNAP Ed, LIAs. Those are local agencies. So I haven't said much about SNAP Ed, but SNAP Ed is sort of an invisible partner if you don't know about SNAP Ed. SNAP is food stamps, what used to be called food stamps. So SNAP lives in DES, but SNAP Ed is the ed part of people who are eligible for food stamps have additional resources. And so ADHS has the SNAP Ed grant. And we have cooperative extension and county health departments as our local agencies that we contract with throughout the state. So every county has a SNAP Ed partner. And almost all of those, it might even be all 15 counties. I can't remember if it's 12 to 15. Almost all of those counties have an ECE strategy. And so there are local agencies that can work with ECE programs. And again, they're working on things like physical activity, empower, learning collaboratives, nutrition, breastfeeding, screen time reduction, farm to ECE, gardening, all of those same kinds of things. So those are other TA consultants that we utilize. And next, I think I'm getting to the end. And so just to kind of promote the systems piece, just kind of FYI, I feel very strongly that Empower and Go NAPSACC is very compatible with all of our other state systems that we have, and there's many more than this, but the ones that kind of came to the top of my head are, quality first. I mean, we look at class and we look at the environmental rating scales, and clearly things like health and nutrition and other supportive practices, are very much in line with the quality first measures and the Empower standards. Same with child care and adult food program, Head Start performance standards, various ECE accreditation systems, your early learning standards and infant toddler guidelines, and teaching strategies gold and program guidelines and all of those things, creative curriculum and many curriculum approaches. I think we're all trying to do the best we can. We're all trying to promote good practices and best practices. The thing that I forgot to say was a couple of years ago with the early learning standards and the infant toddler guidelines, I participated in the revisions committee. And at the time, my goal was to infuse more Empower kinds of examples and language into those. And I think we were successful. We changed a little bit on the physical activity, health and safety portions. Go NAPSACC was not so much on our radar at the time, but I think the more we can all sort of say the same thing, the better off we are with the field. It's very confusing, to the provider out there who, feels like they've got 12 different directions coming at them, and who am I supposed to do, what am I supposed to do, and who am I doing it for? And so that's why I kind of have the, we're really trying to align our messages. So I think that's the end of the slideshow, except for kind of the last, pieces. It looks like we have about 15 minutes left. I'm curious to hear any thoughts, comments, questions, if there's any follow-up needed. And then at the very end, I love to hear kind of a plus delta. What worked well? What would you maybe do differently next time? And maybe we can go off the slides and I can see people again. If you can put your cameras on, that would be fantastic. And thanks for being my slide mover, Wendy, if that was you. I don't know if we ever had any external people come on, but if it's just ADE, that's great too.
We had one school district person hop in, but I think she was here thinking she could talk to Alexis
Oh.
because we're on